The soldiers raised their rifles and fired round after round at the prisoner of war, but the man, who should have collapsed lifelessly to the ground, remained standing, completely unscathed. As the mist swirled around him, the soldiers saw something terrifying, a shadow lurking behind him, something inhuman, something demonic. Unbeknownst to them, just before the gunfire erupted, the man had struck a deal with a demon, offering his very soul in exchange for a single day to fulfill his last earthly wishes. During this time, he would be immune to any harm, until the demon came to claim what was rightfully his. With the dark power surging through him, the man needed no effort to take down every last soldier. Not stopping there, he seized the chest of gold intended as spoils of war for the king. But just as he returned home, driven by a desperate longing to reunite with his wife after years on the battlefield, he was met with an unexpected sight. Lying beside his wife was an infant, no more than a few months old. His joy was fleeting. It took only a moment for the realization to set in. His wife had believed he had perished in war. She had moved on, remarried, and sought comfort in the arms of their neighbor. A tidal wave of anger and despair crashed over him, consuming all reason. Blinded by fury, he did something unthinkable. He reached for the infant, intending to set it ablaze. The child's father, alerted by the commotion, burst into the room, desperately trying to stop him. But the enraged man struck him down with inhuman force, reducing him to a lifeless heap. Horrified, his wife made a desperate attempt to end this madness, trying to strike him down from behind. Yet, bound by the infernal pact, he was untouchable. No mortal force could bring him harm. With no other way out, she chose to take her own life, paying the ultimate price for her choices. Watching the horror unfold at his own hands, the man was consumed with regret. He realized too late that this had all been orchestrated by the demon. So, he entrusted the innocent child to the care of a priest at the church. Meanwhile, he set a cunning trap. When the demon arrived, as promised, to claim his soul, he was captured and locked inside a cage, ensuring that he could no longer roam free and wreak havoc upon the world. The demon, furious at this betrayal, howled in agony, vowing to drag the man's soul into the depths of the underworld. But years passed, and the man gave him no chance. He had abandoned his former life, retreating deep into the mountains, becoming a blacksmith. With the stolen gold, he forged a fortress, a labyrinth of deadly traps, a place of unbreakable defenses. Then, one fateful day, a federal officer arrived in the village with a search warrant, determined to uncover the lost treasure. It didn't take long for him to track down the reclusive blacksmith, Patsy. Without hesitation, the officer quickly gathered 3 villagers and hurried to conduct a search. However, as they arrived at the blacksmith's forge, the cold iron crosses hanging on the gate seemed to give the officer pause. Instead of leading the charge, he hesitated, choosing to remain outside and issue commands from a safe distance. Breaking the chains, the villagers stepped inside. The yard was littered with nails and crucifixes, the air thick with an eerie presence. Even the bravest among them couldn't help but shudder. They warned Patsy to cooperate or face the consequences. But just as Patsy slowly pushed the door open, one of the villagers accidentally triggered a hidden mechanism. A trap was set off. From the shadows, Patsy emerged, clad in a mask and shield. His presence alone was enough to send fear surging through their veins. Especially as the agonized screams of his companions echoed all around him, the man quickly lost the will to fight. Before he could react, Patsy swung his hammer with bone-crushing force, shattering the man's arm. With a swift kick, he sent him sprawling to the ground. Realizing they were outmatched, the survivors scrambled to flee, abandoning their wounded companion to his fate. Yet, against all expectations, Patsy did not finish him off. Instead, he knelt down and released the man from the iron trap. The 2 who managed to escape turned back, only to see their fallen comrade lifeless in the dirt. They were now convinced Patsy was a monster, but the federal officer, he was long gone. Left with no choice, they returned to the village to summon reinforcements. Patsy knew that no matter what he did, the people would never believe him. Resigned to his fate, he prepared to bury the body, unaware that someone had slipped into his yard. A little girl, the same child he had once entrusted to the priest. Her name was Yusue. Having lost her mother to suicide, she had been shunned by the villagers, ridiculed and tormented by her peers. Yet despite the cruelty, she never surrendered, always fighting back against those who sought to tear her down. But her defiant spirit only made her more of an outcast. Even her only companion, a ragged doll, was snatched away by bullies, its head torn off and thrown over the blacksmith's gate. Determined to retrieve it, she summoned all her courage and stepped into the eerie forge. What she didn't expect was to witness Patsy standing over a corpse. Paralyzed with fear, she stayed hidden, slipping into a drainage pipe to escape his notice. But as she navigated the dark tunnels, she stumbled upon something even stranger, a hidden chamber. Then she heard it, the sound of muffled sobs from the next room. Driven by curiosity, she peered through a crack in the wall. Inside, locked within a cage, was a young boy. His body was covered in bruises, his voice trembling as he begged for help. Feeling her heart ache for the helpless child, Usui made a silent promise. She would set him free. Waiting until Patsy was sound asleep, she crept into his room, carefully slipping the key from his belt. With steady hands, she unlocked the cage, freeing the boy from his torment. But something was off. He didn't run. Instead, he reached for a steel trident hanging on the wall. Then, with a chilling grin, he turned towards Paxi's sleeping form. Usui's blood ran cold. The boy's silhouette began to shift, his body contorting and stretching into something unnatural. By the time she realized the truth, it was too late. The demon had been freed. With the trident raised high, he prepared to strike, but at the very last second, Paxi's eyes snapped open. But no matter how skilled Paxi was, he couldn't stop the demon from launching a sneak attack from behind. With no other choice, Paxi reached into the roaring furnace, pulling out a burning iron cross, and struck back with all his might. A searing pain tore through the demon's body, forcing a blood-curdling howl from his lips. Realizing he was no match for Patsy, the demon acted fast. Grabbing Usui, he snarled a final threat. No matter what, he would return to the underworld, rally his kin, and unleash hell upon Patsy. Yet before he could take more than a few steps, his foot landed right onto a hidden bear trap, sending him crashing to the ground. Patsy walked over calmly, towering over the struggling demon before raising his hammer and bringing it down with a deliberate, humiliating strike. It wasn't enough to destroy the demon, but the insult cut deeper than any wound. What came next was even worse. Patsy and Usui locked the demon in a cage and subjected him to the most bizarre torment. Each time he misbehaved, Patsy would reach for his secret weapon, chickpeas. The method was simple. Scatter the chickpeas across the floor, and the demon's obsessive compulsion would force him to count every last one before he could stop. If anyone disturbed the order, he'd have to start over from scratch. It wasn't lethal, but to a demon, it was pure agony. And that wasn't all. Patsy had also forged a soul-devouring bell from pure gold. With just a single shake, the demon would be racked with unbearable pain, writhing in torment. Just as Patsy and Usui were amusing themselves with their newfound power, trouble arrived at their doorstep. The federal officer had returned, riling up the villagers to storm the blacksmith's forge. On the surface, they claimed they were seeking justice for their fallen comrade. But in truth, every one of them had their sights set on Paxi's hidden treasure. Seeing their true intentions, Paxi knew he had little choice. He surrendered without a fight, allowing the villagers to ransack his home in search of gold. But despite turning the place inside out, they found nothing. And when they came across the caged demon, they recoiled in fear, all except the priest. His eyes gleamed with excitement. He saw the demon not as a threat, but as a divine gift. If he could bring the creature to the Vatican and prove the existence of the supernatural, he could ascend to the highest ranks of the church. Without hesitation, the priest attempted to seize control of the situation under the guise of religious duty, but the officer had no patience for his ambitions. He immediately ordered the priest to be thrown out. Once the priest was gone, the villagers wasted no time. They bound Patsy tightly and resorted to torture, determined to extract the location of the hidden gold. What they didn't know was that the officer had no interest in the treasure. His true target was the demon. As the officer stepped forward, his eyes flashed crimson, and the demon's expression twisted in horror. At that moment, he recognized the truth. This man was not human. He was a higher-ranking demon, sent from the underworld to replace him and claim Paxi's soul. Desperate, the captive demon pleaded for mercy, swearing he could still complete his mission, but the officer scoffed. A soul reaper who had been imprisoned by mere humans for 8 years was an embarrassment. He had failed at his duty. When this was over, he would be stripped of his title and demoted to cleaning the infernal toilets of the Pit of Wrath. With his orders delivered, the officer turned to the villagers. He commanded them to hang Patsy. Hidden in the shadows, Usui watched in horror as Patsy's life hung by a thread. But just as despair set in, the demon in the cage made an unexpected offer. He could save Patsy, on one condition. Once it was done, Usui had to set him free. With the demon creating a distraction, Usui acted quickly. She seized the sacred bell and rang it with all her strength. The deafening chime filled the air, forcing the officer's true form to emerge. The villagers were paralyzed with fear. Panicking, 2 of them abandoned Patsy and turned their guns on the hellish figure. The bullets didn't kill the demon king, but they gave Patsy the time he needed to survive. In the chaos, Usue honored the deal. She unlocked the demon's chains. The priest, witnessing this in disbelief, could do nothing as the demon stepped free. But fate had other plans. The demon barely made it a few steps before he once again stepped on a bear trap, crashing to the ground. The villagers, emboldened by his misfortune, descended upon him in a frenzy, beating him mercilessly. Seeing his escape foiled, the priest's fury exploded. He had nearly lost his chance to present the demon to the Vatican. In blind rage, he struck Usue across the face. The girl, shattered by the betrayal, felt her last hope flicker out. Perhaps, she thought, this world was no better than the underworld. At least in hell she could be reunited with her mother. And so, she made an offer to the Demon King, a willing soul. How could he refuse? The deal was sealed. As flames erupted around him, the officer's body expanded, his true demonic form towering above them all. With a wave of his steel trident, he claimed Usue's soul. Patsy watched in despair. She may not have been his by blood, but she carried his wife's bloodline. He couldn't let her go. Turning to the demon he had once captured, Patsy made a final offer. He would fulfill the contract from 8 years ago. He would go to hell in her place. The demon scoffed. He'd rather be beaten in the streets than be forced to take Patsy's soul and scrub toilets in hell. But a debt was a debt. The girl had saved him, and he couldn't ignore that. Reluctantly, he agreed. Yet just as they were about to depart, Patsy dragged something out of the church. A massive bell, forged from pure gold. All this time, the supposed missing treasure had been hidden in plain sight, returned to the church in disguise. The villagers had been too blind to see it. With no time to waste, Patsy turned to the demon and gave his final command: take his soul. A sharp pain ripped through his chest. When Patsy opened his eyes, he was stripped bare, standing in a fiery abyss. The demon, keeping his word, had brought the golden bell with them. Slipping it into a sack, Patsy joined the masses of wandering souls, marching toward the depths of the underworld. But he was not lost. He found Usue. The guards quickly noticed. Acting fast, Patsy ordered the demon to take Usue back to the surface while he stood his ground, wielding his hammer in defiance. But here, in the heart of the abyss, against the ruler of the underworld himself, what chance did he have? Just as the Demon King raised his weapon, ready to claim Patsy's soul, a clay pot shattered against his skull, spilling chickpeas everywhere. Even the mightiest force in hell could not resist the compulsion. Dropping everything, the Demon King fell to his knees, frantically counting. As the first rays of sunlight touched the underworld, the gates began to close. Patsy made a final promise to Usue. He would return for her mother. With a heavy heart, Usue was pulled back to the mortal world, and as Patsy hoisted the golden bell, his name was etched into the very walls of the underworld. For better or worse, he would be remembered.